a fun conversation that we can have, looking back to the golden age, the golden era of great film music. And it's a topic I don't get to talk about enough. So I'm very excited to visit some of the composers, a couple of whom I knew, but most of whom I did not have the opportunity of connecting with personally, like I did with the later generations of composers like Jerry Goldsmith and Elmer Bernstein and kind of everybody since those times. But that's kind of, I guess, looked at as kind of a silver age. Often I've heard it, for film music, but the golden age, for me, it was even it came into my own world following my introduction to a symphony orchestra that came through the scores that John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith were writing in the late 1970s. Initially, it began with Star Wars and Superman from John Williams and Star Trek and Alien by Goldsmith. But I've always been so grateful to the great producer George Korngold and the great conductor Charles Gerhardt, who between them, produced and recorded and created the legendary RCA Classic Film Score series, which is something that I would recommend to absolutely everyone. If you don't have all of these recordings, every one of them is something so special and valuable to the entire world of film music and preserving its extraordinary history and some of the music by some of the greatest composers of the last 100 years, from Korngold and Roja and Steiner and I mean it's remarkable the benefits that came to Hollywood thanks to the European classical world back at that time. And I'm so, as I say, I'm just so grateful to George Korngold and Charles Gerhardt for that entire series. They did special albums, multiple albums for Korngold's music, and then further included Max Steiner and Miklos Rozsa and Bernard Herrmann and Franz Waxman and Tiomkin and just breathtaking performances.
And Robert, looking at the important composers of the golden era in America, I noticed that we have on one side the Europeans one, Max Steiner, Korngold, Miklos Rozsa, Waxman, and in the other, the American ones, Alfred Newman, Victor Young, Bernard Herrmann. Did that resulted in a clearer difference in style, or they were all more or less influenced by the late Romantic style? What do you think?
Yeah, there was a variety in musical influences for each of them. I think we can definitely look at Bernard Herrmann as developing his own language with unique influences into his own writing, but stylistically a very different literature that he incorporated into his film scores versus what was informing the scores being composed, at the same time by Korngold and Steiner and Waxman and Rozsa. Those had different influences. Also, Alfred Newman came to Hollywood from New York and had kind of Broadway influences and as a music director, also different different musical literatures in forming his compositions. Alex North also came a little later, but from an East Coast New York location and musical styles. He was growing up, in a period of time when Samuel Barber was a childhood friend of his.
Wow.
As they would play dual piano recitals at the family homes of each other back when they were children. And then in later years, Alex was kind of part of the school of music that included Leonard Bernstein and Aaron Copland and that period. He wrote his review for clarinet and orchestra as a concert piece for the great jazz clarinetist Benny Goodman, and it was conducted by Leonard Bernstein in the 1940s.
Yeah.
And then again, the legendary kind of friendship between Leonard Bernstein and Aaron Copland came from actually them meeting for the first time while attending an Alex North ballet.
Wow.
And then, as you mentioned, Victor Young, also an American composer. In some ways, I kind of look at Henry Mancini as the later version of Victor Young, who there was such a dominant role of songs that they would each compose in the scores that they wrote. They had incredible aptitude for writing memorable, beautiful tunes and being great songwriters. And from Victor Young, such classics as When I Fall in Love and Golden Earrings, and then of course all I mean so many others, and then Mancini from Moon River and Days of Wine and Roses. But they are, I look at those as connected, in the ever connected timelines of music that reach from country to country and around the world, and all different eras of music, but there are threads that do connect sometimes careers of very disparate backgrounds, but their styles are become linked in a way. And then we see that from in the European schools as well, from Richard Strauss being a friend of Eric Korngold's, and them being kind of stylistically linked,
Yeah.
as well. And then Korngold is his own legendary story, of course, where he was revered, really such a wunderkind of the time, that even composers at the level of Mahler and Puccini and Strauss would look at Korngold with wonderment and just
Yeah.
be, have a hard time even grasping what he was capable of at such a young age.
Yeah, I heard a story that Mahler saw Korngold when he was 14 years old and told, this is going to be the next genius in music,
Yeah.
And I think for Korngold especially, he didn't make much difference between the music he wrote for films and his own music for the concerts, because actually he got the theme from his violin concerto from one film that he had done. He took it from there, so he had no problem, exchanging music between, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a very interesting point too, because in so many ways, Korngold was the groundbreaker and precursor to our whole contemporary era of the blurring of the line between concert halls and film music. And of course the point that all great supporters of film music often make is that the best, it doesn't apply to everything, but the best film music deserves to be performed in concert. The great composers and the greatest works by the composers belongs in the concert hall. And it's time for that to be happening more and more. And thankfully it is happening more and more, but still too slowly. But it was Korngold who really started the merging of those worlds, and did not make a distinction between them. He was a composer, and sometimes he would write for the concert hall, and sometimes he would write for film, but he was always a composer and always did his best work for whatever he was working on. So
Yeah, and I think the Hollywood recognized his talent and his position and gave him a lot of privilege, right? I heard that he could decide on the editing of the film if he needed more music, or if he had like a very special condition there, right?
yeah, he was at the time definitely treated as special of a personality and musician as he was, recognized as an absolute genius, and and revered even within the studio. So as he was doing his his work, and limiting the number, both the number of films he would work on, and also being selective on which films he would accept. Often, I think he was only doing maybe one score a year. That, but he was such a special figure in the entire history of music. That, as I mentioned, of those other great concert composers that I referenced, they looked at him in wonderment and considered him the greatest child prodigy since Mozart.
Wow.
Um, and he was where he was writing concert pieces and even operas when he was a teenager still.
It's
Um,
incredible.
and it's so exciting these days to see, over the course of the last decades, even since the time when Eric's son George and Gerhardt did the RCA classic film score series of recordings, there have been periodic Renaissance eras of Korngold where his concert compositions and his film scores will be being performed more frequently, both in recordings and in concert. And then it subsides for a little bit. So it's like it's more the Renaissance period for Korngold has been these more temporary periods. But my feeling these days is that the current Renaissance we are in, which is definitely the biggest Korngold Renaissance we've enjoyed so far, is broad enough and is now long enough that I think, and I hope certainly, that this one is going to stick, that we will be in a period of Korngold Renaissance and celebration that will endure, where it's not just his violin concerto that's being performed alongside the,
Oh, of
a
course.
Beethoven or a Rachmaninoff concerto. It's not just the violin concerto,
Yeah.
but it's his operas now. Even the operas, which are the
Yeah.
most difficult things to stage, those are being regularly performed. We're seeing performances of Die Tote Stadt and Das Wunder der Hallian and Die Catherine and Violanta, and it's so deserved, it's so warranted, and so important that we keep all of his music
Yeah.
as part of our world. And I'm so grateful to see so many record labels always, the classical labels are really constantly releasing new recordings of his great concert works. And I think and at the top of the list, of course, the violin concerto is fully embraced as part of the standard classical repertoire
Yeah.
now. And I think every violinist in the world has done every major
Yeah.
violinist in the world has done their own recording of it now,
Yeah.
from
It's true.
from Perlman and Anne-Sophie Mutter and Gil Shaham, and I mean, just
Yeah.
absolutely every.
Yeah. Yeah. But Robert, even though his music, of course, is so rich, when you listen to it, it's like, as you said, reminds me of Richard Strauss and all that. I think, I don't know, just for a certain point of view, I think Max Steiner was the key guy, because even though the music of Korngold was very sophisticated, the guy that, in my view, did the revolution for film music was Max Steiner, because he really made it functional for the film, for not only the drama, but also the synchronization, the timing, all that development of the click track and the way he did on King Kong to make the music lock with the film. I think that was a revolution, wasn't it?
Yeah, I would agree to an extent, but I would also stress that I think the golden age doesn't unfold the way it did without both Korngold and Steiner. So they are, I think, the joint grandfathers of the art of film music.
Yeah.
And we also owe a lot even to Alfred Newman at that time, who was so integral to creating the click track approach to how films are technically scored, how the process just unfolds to sync up the music recording with every frame and scene within the film. But Steiner, of course, was an absolute wonder as well, from his scores for King Kong, which is an absolute landmark, and one of my great favorites of all of Steiner's work. It's so much fun and just so brilliant. And we know the world knows very well his famous scores like Gone with the Wind and Now Voyager, and there needs to be so much more. There's not anywhere near enough Korngold being played in contemporary concerts. So it shows that it's still a very slow process, that we are gaining ground in that world.
Yeah.
But again, it's only still a relatively recent occurrence that Korngold is now fully welcomed and embraced into contemporary classical concerts. So
And you
hopefully Steiner will follow. And I'm also,
yeah.
yeah, and also the styles, and I think the stature of composers. I think it's I my feeling is it's inevitable that Bernard Herrmann and Alex North will also find greater acceptance and performances in contemporary classical programs of their film scores and concert works. And then also Franz Waxman, who has made up some ground in that world, but a lot more to come. I mean, his extraordinary scores,
Yeah.
really one of the great masters of
But
the period.
Robert, one thing that I realized is that something that is very particular to this golden era is that the film producers, they were really looking for music talents. That's, for example, how they got Villa-Lobos, our Brazilian composer, into making film music, because the invitation for Korngold and Villa-Lobos also, it's like they were really looking on the scene, on the concert music, and looking up for talents that would fit into their productions. I even heard something like Schoenberg was once invited. It didn't work out, but because he wanted them to choreograph the action with his music, and they didn't accept to do that. But they really were looking on the talents at that time. And I was wondering, I told you this story. I think you probably knew already, but it's good to repeat that. They invited Villa-Lobos. He wrote the music before the film was edited, so he got on to the studio and delivered the scores. And the guys looked at him, but how? You haven't even saw the film yet, But I read the script, and then they got to get another composer to adapt his themes and actually write the music that was used on the film. So unfortunately, I don't think. Do you think we have that nowadays? American film producers looking up on the concert music field, looking up for new composers. Do you think that happened?
Yeah, it does actually.
Oh,
Surprisingly,
really?
it actually still does. I mean, Michael Abels is an example. Most recently, who has is still young enough in his career where he's still making his name in the classical world, but is taking on major concert commissions and creating his opera Omar, absolutely magnificent. And I was lucky enough to see it in Los Angeles, and then it just had a number of performances in San Francisco as well. But I think it's a major contribution to the opera repertoire. Whereas his scores for Get Out and Us, and others show that he's also very adept and talented at film scoring. And so I think he's going to really go on to lead one of the most exciting careers to follow, that will be a duel of him continuing to work in film and continuing to create special concert pieces. So that's a contemporary example of exactly the same thing, I think.
Yeah, great. I will, the idea for this conversation came from João Batista, our friend, who invited you, and he actually was a very much fan of Vahez Saraband, and he knows all the records and got very enthusiastic about it. And he proposed me to talk a little bit what happened in Brazil at the same time. Of course, Hollywood was a model for everybody in the world. Was like the Mecca. Everybody look at it as a model. And in Brazil, in São Paulo, the city that I live in, they constructed a production company called Veracruz, and for the first time they had a special studio built for orchestra recording, and then. And actually, there's a funny thing about it, because it's in Brazil with all the problems that we have here. So first problem, the studio was not well isolated, and then they had to do the recordings during the night because of all the noise, and also during the night the energy wouldn't fluctuate very as much, so all the equipment worked better, so it's very particular, but we had some things in common. Also, they hired the musicians from concert music, like Guerra Peixe, like Camargo Guarnieri, and who else? Gabriel Migliori, Claudio Santoro. Many guys that wrote music for concert were invited to write music. And some of them did some interesting experiments mixing folklore music with symphonic music. And it was a very special moment for us in Brazil. It didn't kept long because they went bankrupt, because there was no such a market here in Brazil for that kind of production. But anyhow, it's interesting how much this golden era influenced, I think, the way of writing music for films all over the world. So thinking that these composers like Korngold came from Europe, and then America influenced back Europe on the way of using music, right? Could you talk a little bit about that? How Hollywood influenced back Europe, where these composers came from?
Yeah, well, and not only geographically, but the way the way Hollywood was formed by drawing from the European concert world of the the 20s, 30s, and 40s. It's interesting to look at then how the influence goes back to the concert hall by different composers. Even John Adams has definitely been influenced by an era of Goldsmith and John Williams, and incorporating elements of their orchestration and their kind of musical literature style into his concert pieces. And um, it really shows, I think, the diminished walls between the worlds of music. And again, just stressing again that, I mean, great composers are great composers, regardless of whether they're writing an opera, writing a ballet, writing a film score, writing a symphony. It's all expression of talent and vision and artistry. And so the having walls or between the different uh genres are needless.
Yeah.
And really ridiculous. So and composers are always influenced by what comes before
And
them.
you are absolutely right, because I saw an interview with John Adams when he was invited to write the music for the debut of Gustavo Dudamel as the conductor of the LA Symphony Orchestra. He
Mhm.
wrote a piece called City Noir, which was inspired on the music of that era of the noir films. So you can
Yeah,
hear in the music of his music, that atmosphere. That it's fantastic. You're
yeah,
absolutely right.
yeah, exactly. And it's wonderful and even inspiring to see influence go from the great composers who have written scores in Hollywood come back to the concert hall through a John Adams, and then his concert works will inspire, provide inspiration to the next generation of composers, some of which will be working in Hollywood and some of which will be working in the concert hall. So it's just an ever changing and evolving world of music. And that's really the important thing to stress, is it's a world of music. It's not compartments. It doesn't need to be compartmentalized. It's a world of music and great composers. And whether they come from Europe or Brazil or from America or Canada or now even the Middle East. I just did a wonderful symphony project last year called the Symphony of Three, where I had three different composers write individual movements of this symphony.
Mhm.
And one movement was written by David Shire, the great film and Broadway composer who lives in New York. The second movement was written by John Debney, living in Los Angeles composer, incredible film scores, who also has his Passion of the Christ symphony as well, and does concert work and conducting as well. And then a great composer I've gotten to know and work with, who lives in Abu Dhabi, named Ehab Darvish, and is a very special talent. And I'm excited to have this piece introduce his work into more Western cultures of music, and kind of bring him and his work into our world more. And then of course even bringing Europe into the mix. The Not as a composer, but my conductor for the symphony was Diego Navarro, my
Wow.
good friend from Tenerife, and he conducted the recording with the orchestra in Poland. So it really became a global symphony between the composers who were involved and the musicians. I had individual soloists from 17 different countries perform.
Fantastic. You
And
know, yeah, yesterday I was interviewing Peter Bernstein, son of Elmer,
yeah, I
probably
know
your
Peter
friend,
well.
I
Yeah,
would guess. And
yeah,
then
and Elmer I
he
did so much
he
work with.
yeah, I was asking him, because myself as a composer, nowadays I divide my time into writing music for concerts and music for the films. For me, it's very important to have a voice as a composer, besides the films, to keep on working on my music. And I think that's true for many composers, but not for him. I asked him, he said, no, I don't have time for that. I have been writing music for film, and once ends, I become I start the next one. I really get get never to stop, to have time. He had written some pieces just for fun, just for the musicians who he works with, but he has not that as a target, a desire or something.
Yeah, no, it's not part of his drive, but it's
yeah,
a different thing for everyone, of course.
yeah,
Miklos Rozsa, for example, he used to, I mean, it's always a challenge for all composers, how to divide up their time and squeeze into their schedule all the things that they would like to do. And so that's always the challenge. But Rozsa would put aside time every summer and go to Rome. And he would spend his time in Europe writing his concert music for that period of time. And then at the end of summer, he would come back. It'd be like a kid going back to school in the fall. He would come back to Los Angeles and go back to MGM and be writing his film scores. And so that was the way he took the approach. Korngold, I think he squeezed in concert pieces whenever he could and whenever he had time, which is also the approach I think that John Williams takes, because John has written an entire family of concertos for every instrument. I think of the orchestra has now had a concerto composed for it by John, and plus he writes, there's so many different fanfare and celebratory pieces. And so it's something that he very much values and makes a priority to find time to do, of creating a repertoire of concert pieces. And but the activity, the productivity, and the demands of being a film composer are challenging indeed. And the other side of the story is, for example, Jerry Goldsmith was constantly one film after another and films overlapping, and had an unrelenting schedule of film scoring, that even though there were just a couple periodic explorations of concert music early in his career, a wonderful piece that Leonard Slatkin commissioned from him in the 70s, and a couple others, but largely he was kept from the concert world by his demanding film scoring sessions and schedules. But at the time he was commissioned by the Los Angeles Philharmonic to write a piece called Fireworks for his 70th birthday, he had so much fun. I mean, first of all, he told me when he first accepted the commission, and he and I were on the phone, and he was telling me about it. He said, yeah, I thought Fireworks, but then he said, then it occurred to me, well, if Stravinsky can write for Fireworks, I can write for Fireworks. And so then he went in and wrote like I think it's like an 8-minute piece or something in that vicinity. And he had so much fun working on that piece and having the freedom of not writing, for a picture, just incorporating the drama of the firework display and how he would compose for that. But he enjoyed that so much. He told me he really wanted to make time and do more of that work. But of course, that was for his 70th birthday.
Yeah.
And then we lost him only 5 years later. And so then he was having health issues over that period, which started also taking time from his work. So again, it was just, there was never going to be enough time for Jerry Goldsmith to give us all that he had to give us.
It's true. Yeah.
That's a limitless well of musical inspiration that he was.
Yeah, I realized I produced some film music concerts in Brazil, and I remember when I got all the music sheets to do the rehearsals. When we put some music together, I think once we did I was trying to remember the theme was music from war films, and then we got, for example, The Last Samurai, and we got also other older films, and John Williams, the rescue of the Ryan soldier and all that. And I realized that certain repertoire, as the Hans Zimmer, for example, on that Last Samurai film, the music, when you would put that as in a concert, the music was not so much symphonic. It was kind of timid. It was not so much as you were mentioning, that collection of RCA Gerhard, a collection. All the music there, I think if you put in a concert, they are very symphonic. They are very outwards. They're very powerful. And the music has changed so much. Sometimes the melody became more rare, and the music became more textural, not as much, not as much eloquent, maybe more, right? And so I realized that maybe, thinking of the golden era, where the music seems to me to be very outwards, compared to what more recent music is being written for the films. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, a more overt stylistic approach from the golden age. I think that's fair to say. That was the musical style of the time. But of course, I don't think that concert music or concert performances rely solely on melody or works of that style. I think you can go the other direction as well, and we've explored on through the work of many composers different approaches to what can be performed in concerts. Elliot Goldenthal, another great composer who writes both for the concert hall and for film, very contemporary or musical language in his work, maybe a Penderecki inspired, and others. So it's wonderful to see all of the work that Elliot has done, including his ballet Othello, which I was so happy to record and release many years ago. I think it's one of his great works. And then just other other composers and styles that come to, I mean, even so melody is important, but it's not the only thing. It's a style and an approach. Even I like also taking the opportunity when I'm producing a concert to incorporate some of my composer friends, and sometimes have them, in the work that I have them prepare for a concert. Maybe it's an overture or a suite or something from a score of their own work, but we'll maybe ask them to arrange an opening overture for a program if they're involved in that show, or another concert that I'm maybe producing at the in the same city around the same time, or to do a special arrangement that further explores a melody by a composer from the past, but maybe gives it a new treatment. For example, Alex North's Spartacus, the love theme from Spartacus, which the great composer Lee Holdridge did a special arrangement of a fantasy for flute and orchestra.
Wow.
For the American, Los Angeles-based flutist Sarah Andon, and she's played that all over the world now, from Macau in Krakow and Tenerife and Los
Mhm.
Angeles.
And Robert, you produced many albums while in Saraband. Uh, oh, tell me a little bit about the albums that you recorded with the music of the golden era, that you were maybe surprised when you got to hear the music being on the set being recorded. You were like, what what can you tell us about
Oh my
that?
goodness. Yeah, absolutely. Well, um, definitely the composers from the golden age that I featured most prominently in my recording series, principally I guess in London and in Scotland, in Glasgow with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, were Alex North, Bernard Herrmann, Franz Waxman. um, and hearing these scores come to life, I mean, I've often described as the morning of those recording sessions when the musician starts showing up for the session and looking through the pad of music of what they'll be playing that day, that one of my favorite sounds in the world is to hear them start to, they'll flip through their pads and see what's facing them, and then they'll see a certain passage that's maybe particularly challenging, and you'll start to hear little glimpses of of motifs coming to life for the first time. Maybe it hasn't been played for 10 or 20 or
Yeah.
30 or 40 years.
Robert, I have to interrupt you a little bit because now I need to translate a little bit in Portuguese, because now we have that pause for the translator, ok?
Okay.
Então, o Robert está dizendo que eu perguntei a ele o que ele, como produtor de música de filme, fez uma gravação de uma séries de discos, e aí eu perguntei sobre as gravações que ele fez da música da Era de Ouro dos Estados Unidos, né, do cinema. E ele comentou que ele foi a sessões de gravação, e o que chamava a atenção dele era ver os músicos da orquestra virando as páginas e procurando as passagens difíceis que eles iriam gravar, né? E ele começava a ouvir aquelas passagens tocadas pelos instrumentos, coisas que estavam na gaveta há mais de 30 anos e que naquele momento estavam sendo ressuscitadas, né, pela primeira vez, e ele gostava de observar a reação dos músicos diante da inventividade, do poder daquilo que eles estavam se deparando pela primeira vez. You can continue, Robert, please.
Absolutely. Okay. And so I love that sound of starting to hear a score, an old score from the past, sparkle to life with these little bits of performance that the musicians will start to play. And then I've got a few stories. Time is limiting, but particular memories of the sessions in Scotland when I recorded Franz Waxman's Sunset Boulevard score, which was an Academy Award-winning score that never had a soundtrack album released at the time. It was a different period. So when I was recording the score with Joel McNeely in in the late 90s, or I think that was into the early 2000s, that was one of the later ones. One of the cues I was able to record, because I found the manuscript, was a scene that Waxman scored in the film that is not part of the final film. It was the original prologue sequence that was cut from the movie, and the footage was lost. But it was a scene, the way the film was originally going to open was a 10-minute sequence where the William Holden character wakes up in the morgue after his death. He's in the morgue, and he wakes up surrounded by other corpses who also are animated, are kind of coming back to life in the context of this surreal
I will
exchange.
just do a translate.
Yeah.
Então, o Robert estava contando uma história fantástica da trilha de um filme que ele gravou na Escócia, que é o Sunset Boulevard, que não havia um disco lançado dessa trilha, né? Então ele foi gravar na Escócia com a orquestra, e no processo de produzir, ele descobriu um manuscrito de uma música que foi tirada do filme, porque o prólogo do filme começava com esse personagem que acordava é, morto no necrotério e acordava e se via no meio de outros corpos e tal. E é uma cena para a qual foi composta a música original e que foi cortada do filme junto com a música. Ele achou esse manuscrito e gravou essa música originalmente. Foi uma descoberta incrível, né? Que não havia nem no filme. Então, ele vai continuar contando sobre isso. Go on, please, Robert.
So in that scene, everyone is coming back to life, and they are starting to tell the stories of how they met their own ends. So, um, so William Holden, his character Joe, it tells his fellow corpses how he was killed, how he died. And Waxman wrote a 10-minute cue called Conversing Corpses. And he scored the scene, but it was never heard in the film because the whole scene was removed from the film. But I found the manuscript and was able to record this 10-minute cue with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra and Joel McNeely conducting. And for me, I mean, it's one of the great cues that Waxman ever composed. It's very possibly my favorite cue of the entire score, and was a major discovery to unearth and reveal a 10-minute cue from an Academy Award-winning score that has never been heard before, and that in a lot of ways even is the greatest cue of the score.
Então, o Robert estava explicando o seguinte, que esse filme que ganhou a trilha, ganhou o Oscar de melhor trilha sonora, né? E esse cue não é um cue simples, é um cue de 10 minutos. E ele comenta que foi um achado, porque foi uma descoberta, e que, na opinião dele, é o melhor cue do filme, sendo que ele não entrou no filme, porque foi cortado, e também não entrou na trilha. Então, a descoberta desse manuscrito foi um grande feito para ele, né, em termos dessa descoberta, e é algo incrível. And Robert, is there any other recording that you remember that you would like to tell us about from this repertoire of the Golden Era?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, there's so many. I mean, there's recording Bernard Herrmann's Citizen Kane, was magnificent, and hearing the Salambo aria performed by the great Janice Watson, who came from London up to Glasgow for our recording, was magnificent. I remember recording Herrmann's score for The Trouble with Harry, the Alfred Hitchcock movie, another score that had never been released. That it was just so amazing the day that CD finally came out, and I was able to, even for myself, file it into the Bernard Herrmann section. And all of a sudden, even though the entire history of my film music collecting, there was always a vacancy, a CD missing, that there was just no space, even because there was nothing released from The Trouble with Harry. And then all of a sudden, one day, I was able to push the CDs aside and make a little space for it and slide it in, and all of a sudden that existed.
Fantástico. Ele está contando a história de que, em outros casos também, né, casos de trilhas incríveis. No caso do Bernard Herrmann, por exemplo, tem um filme do Hitchcock chamado Trouble with Harry, que eu não sei se é problema com Harry, não sei qual que é a tradução em português, mas que também o filme saiu e a trilha não foi gravada. Então, assim, existia no repertório, né, do Bernard Herrmann e do Hitchcock um buraco, né, uma lacuna daquele filme que não havia trilha sonora. Então, ele finalmente, quando fez a gravação, ele pôde preencher aquele espaço com o disco que faltava para completar, digamos assim, a coleção de obras do Hitchcock com Bernard Herrmann. Please continue, Robert.
Another really important discovery that we made, rescuing a piece that had been lost, was when I was recording Alex North's A Streetcar Named Desire with Jerry Goldsmith conducting. And this was a recording I did in London with the National Philharmonic Orchestra in 1995. And we found the manuscript for the cue that Alex wrote for the very famous, legendary, iconic scene of Stella descending the staircase into Stanley's arms, waiting he's waiting at the bottom screaming, Stella, Stella. And she comes down. And the piece that Alex wrote for that scene originally back in 1950 was deemed too carnal and suggestive. Even as an instrumental piece of music, it was too daring and suggestive, and it was censored from the original film as being too overtly sexual. And so it was lost for all those years until our recording.
Ele está contando numa outra história também de outro achado dele na trilha de um filme com a trilha do Alex North, que tem uma cena famosa que a Sarah desce uma escadaria e que ele tinha escrito uma música muito ousada, muito sensual, e que o estúdio vetou a música por ela ter essa característica muito insinuante e tal, muito sexualizada. Então, foi cortada da trilha do filme e, portanto, não tinha registro disso. Ele achou essa partitura, né, e pôde gravar pela primeira vez, as pessoas puderam ouvir uma música que foi censurada num filme tão conhecido e uma cena tão emblemática, né? So you can continue, Robert.
So we were able to record that and restore it for the album, and then when Warner Brothers was releasing the new DVD and ultimately then Blu-ray as well, following that time, they were also able to restore that scene and that cue as it was originally written, because Alex had to rewrite it at the time to just a special arrangement of his love theme, and so it did not feature the cue that he wrote until all these years later in the 90s, and thankfully we inspired the studio to put it was restored to the film, and so all cuts of the film now include the music that Alex wrote, and it's you can definitely hear how evocative and you know, sexual a piece it is, and you know, of course that doesn't, you know, faze anyone these days, but at the time it was very daring.
And Robert, did you I was very touched by that what you said about the musician's reaction to the music, you know. That's wonderful, because I think for us composers, what is more touchable for us is when the musicians like your music, you know, because it's not when they got involved. So that influences a lot the performance. When the music they like it, you know, they take it, and the result is completely different. So I was wondering, you know, your attention to that thing, I think, is very special, because really the result depend on how the musicians really get involved into the music, right?
Yeah, I would share one story too of when I was working on a new CD of Alex North's score for the film The Long Hot Summer, with Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. I was going through all the tapes, and I was really struck by the recordings from the studio where after every cue was finished, the orchestra would give him a huge ovation.
Wow.
An overtly huge ovation. And it really made an impression on me. I'd never heard anything like that. Often, if an orchestra really loves a score that they're performing on, they'll give an ovation at the end of the session. So at the end of, you know, the end of the day or at the end of the full week of sessions, and there'll be an ovation for the composer. But in this case, there was an ovation after every cue was completed. And later that day, I was on the phone with Jerry Goldsmith, and I mentioned this. I told him what I had experienced. He asked me what I was working on, and so I told him this story of, yeah, I'm working on a new CD of Alex's Long Hot Summer score, and I said I was so struck by hearing the ovation from the orchestra after every cue, and how much enthusiasm and appreciation there was from all of the musicians, and Jerry was not surprised at all, and it didn't faze him at all. He said, "Doesn't surprise me at all." He said they knew. They knew who Alex was and how important his music was.
What was
So
Jerry Goldsmith the responsible for the conducting on the recording of 2001 Odyssey that you?
yes, 2001 was the beginning of this series of Alex North recording sessions that I had Jerry as conductor for. We did 5 of Alex's scores before we sadly lost Jerry, years later. But we did 2001: A Space Odyssey in January of '93. Then we did A Streetcar Named Desire in '95, and then the next 3 we did The Agony and the Ecstasy, Viva Zapata, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So Jerry conducted all 5 of those albums for me, and it was just something so special in the world of film music, because Jerry had never conducted recordings of another composer's work before these projects came up. And my good friend, who we just lost last year, the great pianist Mike Lang, I remember having lunch with him shortly after the release of the 2001 score, and he told me how just amazed he was by the whole project and hearing that music. And he said, this is just so remarkable what you're doing, to have Jerry Goldsmith conducting Alex North. It would be like someone having a recording series of Mahler and having Bruckner conduct.
Yeah, it's true. Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah,
And it was
I was.
such an important score, of course, to rescue after all those years the
Mhm.
legendary lost score for 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the shameful treatment that Stanley Kubrick, gave to Alex North at the time. And thankfully, finally, we got to set history, to the extent that we could correct things and at least get the music out there and share it, even though we can never undo, the circumstances of what Kubrick had done, and robbing from Alex the opportunity of having his music revealed at the same time the film is. So no one ever gets to experience 2001: A Space Odyssey for the first time with Alex's score. Restorations, they don't work, even because, first of all, the score, the film was still being, it was re-edited. The editing was still going on at the time when Alex was already, not doing any work. So it doesn't sync up uh, with the current cut. But there are certain scenes that are kind of, will work to an extent. But the point is,
Mhm.
no one gets to. We've all been living with 2001 for our whole lives, with the
Yeah,
Strauss and the, Ligeti and other composers. So that's already, it can't be extracted from our impression of what the film is, and
yeah,
we can't undo that. But at least the music exists on its own, and the recording, thankfully, saves and preserves Alex's incredible music.
yeah. And what I think is very important about your work is not only recording the music, is doing all this research and rescue of the original manuscripts. Brazil right now, we
Meus
have been
amores, o vídeo de
discussing
hoje foi
that. We
maquiar e
have
ver
an
o motivo que
orchestra
vocês vierem.
called
Então, o
OSTN,
hambúrguer que não pode faltar. E olha só,
our
esse
National Symphony
bacon,
Orchestra. They
tudo.
have a program each
Temos
year
batata
they
frita e olha.
dedicate for film music of Brazil. And then they ask me all the time, hey, Alex, what should we do? What films? And all the films that we have symphonic music written for, we don't know where the music, all the manuscripts are. So it's fantastic that you have done that in all the research, and you brought the music alive because you found the manuscripts. You begin, because it's a lot of work before the recording. The recording itself is already a lot of work, but before that, you have to do all the research and make the
Exactly. We've got
music
to know the history.
readable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think it's a treasure. It's a real treasure. So we are maybe we're trying to think of a way to make it possible also here, And I say to everyone, is in a way, it's like a lost treasure that we don't know where that is. But if we find it, as you've done, it will be such a great achievement, a great, really. So maybe you can teach us a way how to do that. How do you approach the resources? How do you research and how you work? To make that possible, which is incredible.
Yeah, everything is its own case. Every story is an original story. So it's different every time. I mean, another scene that I was so grateful for discovering was when I was recording Franz Waxman's score for Rebecca, which was the 1940 Hitchcock movie. And so that's from the very very early in the golden age, 1940. Even so, this is a score even a year before Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
And the sequence in the film where Maxim de Winter returns to Manderley and with his new bride is welcomed back to the family home by the housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers. And so Mrs. Danvers brings them into the front foyer of the home, and it's the introduction scene where we're meeting Mrs. Danvers for the first time. And the entire sequence had a cue composed for it by Franz Waxman, but it was replaced in the original film by the temp track. So even in 1940, when films had only been being scored for a couple years, Franz Waxman had to deal with a temp track, and it was a cue that Max Steiner had written for an earlier movie that ended up in the film. And so it was only in the late 1990s when I was doing a new recording of his complete Rebecca score, where I was able to restore the cue that Waxman wrote for that sequence.
Wow.
And put the score back together again the way he intended.
So the temp love was already
already happening in 1940. It's just unbelievable.
Wow, that's fantastic, man. So many great stories, man.
Think it's a new phenomena, or that they're the first ones to deal with things like that. No, it goes all the way back to the beginning of the art form.
And for this cue, did you try to superpose the actual cue that you recorded with the scene on the film? No,
I don't think I did anything like that. I just recorded it for the album, and the scene was never the way A Streetcar Named Desire had the cue restored in the film. This one never happened. This never happened in the case of Rebecca. So it's only the RSNO recording is the only way to experience Waxman's original intent and that cue for that scene. I think also there's a scene in North by Northwest that had Herman's score dropped from the film as well, and I restored that when I did a recording of North by Northwest with McNeely conducting in the early 2000s also. And so again, even for a legendary score like that, we were finding, I think, a 4-minute cue that where the CD is the only way to experience that.
They had this TV documentary series on film composers, and I remember the last film that Bernard Herrmann worked with Hitchcock was Torn Curtain, and then they found the manuscripts of the music he had written for the film that Hitchcock dropped, and there was a special sequence I remember on the release of the film, there is like a 6 minutes sequence without one note of music, but Bernard Herrmann had written music for it, so they did a try to put on the music. He had written for the sequence, and it makes so much more sense, because without music, the scene really loses its power. And with the music,
exactly. That was just one of the great tragedy stories in all of film music history, is the dissolution of the relationship between Herrmann and Hitchcock over the course of the Torn Curtain recording sessions. But Herrmann understood exactly what the film needed. He wrote the score that was the exact score that the film needed, and sadly, it just wasn't. And the studio was pressuring Hitchcock to give more of a popular approach to the score, a beat. He wanted a beat in the score and things like that. And John Addison was a wonderful composer and wrote beautiful music, but not. But the right score for Torn Curtain was the Herrmann score, which we only got on an album form. I also did a recording of the Herrmann Torn Curtain score in London many years later.
You did you do that, Robert?
Yes. And had the incredible orchestration that he created with 9 trombones and 16 horns and 12 flutes. So it was was a very powerful ensemble. Brilliant score, brilliant writing. And he didn't unfortunately wasn't able to complete the score, so we don't have the full ending, and we don't hear exactly what he would have done. Unfortunately, it was he was fired before
he got complete. That.
It was at lunchtime one day where Hitchcock just told him not to come back, and so he was supposed to be at the afternoon session recording more music, and instead he was in a restaurant across the street from the studio getting a burger or something. But it was just sad, because they were never friends again, never worked together again after that, which was just tragic, because they were meant to be together. And
such a partnership, right?
Yeah, partnerships in all film music history.
Yeah. And now, Robert, our friends from Musimagem will join us, on this farewell.
Fantastic. So, the finale of Musimagem for 2023.
Yeah, great, Robert. How many stories? Oh, you must come here in person and we can talk 3 days.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, well, as you know, my stories go on forever. So even with 3 days, we would need 3 more days, and then 3 more days.
It's true. No, Alex.
Hello, Robert.
Hello. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Great to hear you too.
Fantastic. Yeah, I wish we could all be in person, but I look forward to when we can be.
For sure.
Soon.
Yes,
I hope everyone had a great time at the festival this year, and I'm so happy that you had that you all had time with Harry Gregson Williams and were able to have him as a guest. Wonderful composer, wonderful guy, good friend. So I'm glad that he had an experience that he'll remember and cherish.
Yes. Would be fantastic if we could get everybody on the next year, because it's gonna be the 10th festival. Would be nice to invite all the great guests that we had over the years. So Robert will be definitely one of our special guests.
Oh, that would be a great celebration for the 10th anniversary.
Yeah,
I have so many wonderful memories. It was such a beautiful time I had in Brazil with all of you, and really appreciate that time.
You can imagine, Laurence Rosenthal was in Rome now, 19 something years old. It's fantastic.
Do you remember Laurence? He was pushing the piano on the stage, 90 years old. Said, no, stop. man, he had such energy, you know.
Wow. Well,
He was so
I'm so happy that you guys had the experience of having Lawrence Rosenthal there, because he's a long time, forever friend of mine. He and I were working together 30 years ago on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. And I hope you all saw that I just gave him the Special Life Achievement Award at the World Soundtrack Awards in Ghent last
wow,
month.
that's fantastic. Man.
And I can't recommend enough. You have to hear. I did a new album recording of Larry's music with the Brussels Philharmonic. 75 minutes of newly recorded Lawrence Rosenthal suites, just recorded a couple months ago, and the album was released at the festival this year. It was so beautiful and such a wonderful experience. He gave a beautiful speech and was such an inspiration for all the younger composers who were there at the awards, and that they all also had the opportunity of getting to meet him, such a legend, and so was so inspiring. And he just turned 97 now.
Wow.
Wow.
Is still active. And I even had
Fantastic.
Yeah, he just did a couple new arrangements for the new recording as well. So I still had him doing work for it, and was having a Zoom with him every few days while we were preparing the program.
Oh,
Wow.
that's such an inspiration, man.
Yeah, he's just a beautiful human being, wonderful, extraordinary talent, so much amazing music, and it was so emotional to be with him at the recording sessions for the new album, and to be sitting with him as he's hearing the performance by the great Brussels Philharmonic, performing music that he had written in some cases over 60 years ago.
Wow.
And to have that music kind of coming back to life in front of him, being performed so beautifully by the great orchestra with Dirk Brasset conducting. It was just remarkable, and so moving, and now I'm so grateful that this album exists. It's the first newly recorded Lawrence Rosenthal compilation album ever in history, and so to finally have it, after all this time, and celebrate his music and hear it played, where you can hear things in the orchestration that were just not possible from recordings that were done in the 50s. So to hear details and nuances and delicacies within a score like The Miracle Worker or A Raisin in the Sun, and then the big adventure scores like Clash of the Titans and the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, just so much fun and so important. So I was so grateful that you guys had the opportunity of having Larry as a special guest, back when he was younger and able to travel down to Brazil.
It's true. Yeah, no, it was amazing. It was amazing. Lawrence Rosenthal, Bruce Broughton, Christopher Young, Hugh Gorka, Bruno Coulet from France, Luis Vaz from Spain, and then now Harold Gregson Williams is fantastic. And
a fantastic role you're playing in being part of the international community of celebrating film music, great film music, and great composers, and so it's very much appreciated all that you are doing in beautiful Brazil, and just taking part in our global celebration of great film music.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much.
Robert,
And
thank
your
you very
partnership
much.
is very important for us, for the festival. Thank you, Robert.
Oh, my pleasure. I cherish all of our friendships and memories of the beautiful time I had when I visited a few years ago, and I can't wait to come back, and hopefully it'll maybe be for the 10th anniversary celebration next year. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, Alexandre, Alex, João. Abramos, assim, Dutch Consulate, Marta, Renan, Ufi, everybody that help and support this festival. And, Ale, João, Alex, say the last word in our festival.
I just wanted to thank Robert for this wonderful stories that he told us. A lot of inspiration for us to keep on our festival. Making I think it's make the music still alive, still celebrating the composers, celebrating the music. So it's an effort in Latin America, an effort to contribute on this world movement towards film music. And we happy and very privileged to have Robert helping us to maintain this festival. So I would like to thank everybody, all my friends at Musimagem, and tonight Robert for his wonderful participation.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you all.
I think that this year the festival was the bigger festival that was made. The bigger concert, the most number of international guests, and this was only possible because the association members, the association direct boards, and our partnerships like Robert Townson, Gorka Teza, Michael Carson, join forces, join energy to make a festival with all troubles that make a festival, make art in the country that is out of the center, the financial center of the world. It is possible only with the union of everybody. Thanks and congratulations for everybody in the soundtrack field.
Wonderful. I also just want to add that it was so beautiful to see all of the musicians and composers who took part in the virtual interviews this year. And so to see Catherine Joy and Sarah Andon and Brad Fidel and the others was just bravo to you all for putting together that incredible schedule and all of the amazing interviews with each of them.
Alex.
Well, first I want to thank to be able to participate in this festival. It's the first festival that I am part of the board, and I want to congratulate everyone, our guests, Marcos, João, Alexandre, Robert, and it's a great inspiration. I think we as composers, we are so lonely, like writing our music, and when we are together and watching a beautiful concert and meeting Egberto Gismonti, which is an amazing composer, Brazilian composer, and all our guests, even online, it's a really inspiration, I believe, for us and for the audience and for the new composers. So I know it's really hard to make it. Marcos and João were doing like the impossible to bring this festival, but it's really important to happen because of this, because there are people out there that are inspired by it. So I wish that we can do it better every year. So congratulations to all, and thank you once again.
Great. So, Prost. And in Dutch, we can say, tot volgende keer. See you next year.
See you.
Until next year, Musimagem.
Viva!
Yes.
Yes.
Tchau,
Thank
tchau.
you.
Thank
Ciao.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.